What makes the achievement of emotional sobriety so difficult is the habits we have, the patterns we have in our behavior, the habitual ways that we've come to think about things. We have to really become aware of those things in order to challenge them, because the consciousness that has created a lot of the problems in our life cannot solve it, cannot change things. So what happens is the first step is waking up. Tonight, we are continuing to explore how the 12 steps operate to facilitate the achievement of emotional sobriety. And we are currently discussing step number 8 out of the 12, which is we made a list of all persons we had harmed. We became willing to make amends to them all. Now, I always want to remind us that the way the steps or what the steps are moving us towards is what I would call emotional freedom. And we gain emotional freedom through learning how to support ourselves. You see, the more I can support myself, the less I'm going to be dependent on my environment and on people in my environment or circumstances in my environment to be a certain way to make me okay. As I learn to support myself, now I become the determining factor in my well-being, not what's happening around me. And that is what the steps are facilitating, is the achievement of what I'm going to call self-support. You're also going to hear me use the phrase an awful lot, that the steps are helping us learn to support ourselves through helping us be differentiated. Just a real, very brief example of differentiation and undifferentiation is when we are in the womb, we are completely undifferentiated. We are fused with our mother, with the woman that is carrying us in her womb. She provides us with oxygen, with nutrients, with warmth, with security. Everything is done for us. We have complete dependency on her. The minute we are born, we start to differentiate ourselves from that mother. The umbilical cord is cut, and what's the first thing we have to do? Well, mom's not going to breathe for us anymore. We now take over that job. We take responsibility to give ourselves oxygen by inhaling and exhaling. We take oxygen in, we blow off carbon dioxide. That is the beginning of our differentiation. And what I've said so often is biological differentiation is hardwired into you as a person. No one had to tell you to breathe unless you were neurologically impaired, and then they had to put you on a ventilator because you wanted to breathe. That's who we are. Just like you wanted to walk at some point in your life. So this becomes a very important thing. What happens is what we've been talking about is our differentiation psychologically and emotionally isn't as hardwired. It is so dependent on a certain kind of relationship and interaction with those people around us, including the culture we live in and the messages from the culture, the messages from our family, the dynamics. And none of us are given what we need to differentiate ourselves emotionally, psychologically, or spiritually. So we grow up arrested in our development. And, we've talked about how when we embrace step 1 and we talk about our powerlessness and that our lives have been unmanageable, is that unmanageability started well before we picked up a drink. Now, picking up a drink or using other drugs or whatever we did that was a manifestation of our addiction, just exacerbated the condition, that really pushed our unmanageability to new levels. But we were living a life that was unmanageable before that because of these issues that we're talking about, this emotional dependency. Now, we looked at step 6 and 7, how we got ready to have these defects of character removed, and we humbly asked him to remove our shortcomings. And those steps are really pivoting us towards developing our best possible attitude towards ourselves, towards life, towards circumstances, and towards our fellows. That's what's happening here. And what I love happening is that as the steps build up a charge and they say, all right, now you're going to develop your best possible attitude, the next step says, how do you do that? Well, what we're told to do is step 8 is make a list of all persons that we've had, people that we have harmed, and become willing to make amends to them all. Now, it's very important that as we're making this list, that we are paying attention to the patterns of our behavior. Because if we're able to really look at the patterns in our behavior, we are going to learn about ourselves. We're going to become aware of who we are and who we're not. See, that's the important thing. The pedestal of emotional sobriety is based on self-awareness. We cannot achieve emotional sobriety without increasing our level of self-awareness, without increasing our consciousness. It's just not going to happen. So now we're tasked with being as specific as we possibly can be. And that's what we're doing. And I've talked before on how the first person that we've harmed, that we have to investigate the harm we've done to, is ourselves. How we've harmed ourselves, what we've done to ourselves. And the last several weeks now, we've been investigating and exploring how at an early point in our life, a self-hating process started to develop within us. And that self-hating process is part of what we've done to hurt ourselves. Now, I want to define certain terms tonight because we're going to be using those to understand this process and for me to even share with you an idea that came to mind today when I was thinking about this talk. But I want to define the following terms. I want to define the term actual self, real self, idealized self, and despised self. So can somebody put those in the chat? So it's going to be actual self, idealized self, real self, and despised self. Now let's start out with the actual self. What does it mean when I say actual self? Well, it means that's who I am right now. It's the sum total of my being today. It includes the best in me and the worst in me. It includes the healthy parts of me and the parts of me that are not healthy. So my actual self is Alan Berger as I stand in this world at this particular moment in my life, with the sum total of my experiences at this particular point in time, who I am as I sit here with you right now. Now, if I'm humble about my actual self, I realize it means that I have limitations, I have gaps in knowledge, I make mistakes, etc., etc. And we're going to talk about how the kind of relationship we have to ourselves and our actual self in a minute. So that's the first thing. The actual self is who you are right now, right in your life, or at any particular time in your life. Where you were at any moment was your actual self. Now, your real self is, or you could call it, I've also used the word true self, is it's reflects the potential you have to be a fully functioning human being. So your real self is the possibilities we have as a human being. And I would like the way my mentor, Dr. Kempler, wrote the word human being, human, comma, being. And what it means to be that fully functioning individual. Well, we'll define that more and more as we continue down this road. But just a taste of it is that fully functioning individual is an individual who is differentiated. That is the possibility for us, is to become differentiated. That's what we're moving towards. That's that force of self-actualization that is always moving us towards that position of differentiation. So we've defined the actual self, who I am right now. The real self, true self, is what my possibilities are as a fully functioning individual, as a fully functioning person. Now, I want to define our idealized self, because this is the self that I imagine that if I am, then I am always going to feel okay. I'm always going to feel loved. I'm always going to feel security, or I'm going to feel safe. I'm always going to feel like I belong. So the idealized self comes up in our consciousness as a response to what Dr. Karen Horney called the search for glory. So at a very, very early age, we become anxious. She called it a basic anxiety. We become anxious that we're not going to be loved and accepted, and we're not going to belong. And since we aren't differentiated when this anxiety comes up and we can't stand on our own 2 feet and take care of us, we got to figure out something to do to resolve that anxiety, to ensure that we're going to be loved and accepted, that our existence is going to continue in some way. So we come up with an idea of who we have to be loved and accepted and belong. That idealized self becomes something that we then dedicate ourselves to actualize. And we put all the energy into becoming what we think we should be, rather than to being who we are. That's the beginning of our unmanageability, by the way. We are trying to manage and control the people and circumstances around us to be okay. And we come up with this idea: I should be suspicious of what I think is going to work. Right? Now, look, that idea happens at a very young age, and obviously it evolves in some way as we go on. And, some people say that it might even be pre-verbal. But we do come up with an idea that if I am this person, I am going to be okay. And Dr. Horney says it takes 3 different paths: the appeal of mastery, the appeal of love, or the appeal of freedom. She says we're going to go in one of those 3 directions, and we're going to engineer the false self around that trajectory, whichever one that we've taken. So that's the idealized self. You also will hear it referred to as the false self. Now, there's something that happens. As soon as I set this up, I also create a tyranny of these shoulds. Now, my life becomes run by all of these ideas who I should be. And these ideas are there. They're the scaffolding of the false self. They're there to make sure that I continue to grow along these lines, to make certain that I continue to be what I think I should be, because that's where my salvation lies. It's a very powerful force. She calls that the pride system that wraps itself around this false self, this idealized self. And now, this is where now the despised self shows up. This is where self-hate comes in. Because if I am not what I am supposed to be, if I am not doing what I should do, I despise myself. I hate myself. And because I can never be what I'm not the false self. The self-hating process is active and alive shortly after we give birth to this idealized self. Because I can never be that idealized self. It's Bill called it in his letter, an impossible way of life. And that's what this is for us. We build our life on a foundation of rejecting who we are to be something we're not. That by its very definition, last time I read you the definition of self-hate. Self-hate is any personal construct, attitude, or behavior which diminishes, dismisses, detracts from, depletes, denigrates, or hurts. I'm going to add something this week that I didn't add last week. That hurts. Last week I said our real self. Today I'm going to include our actual and our real self. Remember the definition now of actual self, who I am right now. I can't just have compassion towards what I can be. I need to have compassion to who I am as part of my evolution towards what I can be. And that's why we have to include that if I'm rejecting my actual self right now, it's a part of that self-hating process. I hope you can appreciate that nuance, because when I saw it today, I said, oh my goodness, this is such an important thing for us to keep in mind when we're starting to explore and understand what self-hate is doing to us. We have created an impossible situation. If I can't be what I think I should be, then no matter what, I'm not okay. What a dilemma that we've created for ourselves. Well, last week I went over all of the different ways that self-hate manifests itself. I think Thom Potash called it a checklist. And I think you said you hit every one of them, Thom, is what I remember you saying last week, that as we went through them. And of course, I can relate to them as well, because this is part of the human experience. So I really want you to understand that this is an adaptation to trying to find a way to be okay. This is the manifestation of that self-actualization, although it's taken a slight veer when we try to dedicate and ourselves to actualizing this true self. I mean, this idealized self rather than our true self, and also accepting our actual self. But today we're not going to go into the direct manifestations. We're going to be talking about the indirect ways that this self-hating process shows up. Now, once again, I want to put this in the context of what we're trying to do, or what I'm talking about is what the steps do to help us achieve emotional sobriety. You see, emotional sobriety is really about a different relationship with ourselves, with our fellows, and with life. And if my relationship with myself is flawed, my relationship with you is going to be flawed. And if my relationship with myself is flawed, my relationship with life and reality is going to be flawed. There's no way that I can have a healthy relationship with myself if I'm hating myself. No way at all. It's impossible. It's going to continue. I'm going to continue to sabotage my best efforts to try to build a better life. Because there's a problem in the very foundation of my life that's created by this self-hate. and by this whole operation I set up when I think I've got to be something other than myself to be okay. I hope you can hear how absurd that is. Because what happens here is if we start to understand what happens in the unconscious, we understand the unconscious doesn't think that to be absurd at all. You see, in your unconscious, compromises can exist without looking like compromises. In the unconscious, there's no need for consistency, no need for congruence. You will have two things juxtaposed to each other, and they won't seem like they're odd bedfellows. They seem like they're going to fit for some reason, even though they don't. In your unconscious, you can be committed to integrity, but at the same time be a liar. We'll get into that in a little bit. That's deepening the subject. I want to stay with the indirect forms of self-hate. So, oh, by the way, I hope you can see too now in the way that we're talking about this, self-hate contributes to the emotional dependency. Because remember, I constructed my idealized self to get you to love me, to get you to accept me, for you to welcome me so I belong. So right at that moment, I'm already operating from my dependency on you. I need you to be a certain way for me to be okay. And of course, this grows out of that early consciousness because we haven't differentiated ourselves yet. We don't see the possibility of being able to stand on our own 2 feet when we develop this. So at this point, it is the best, or what I love what Dr. Kempler used to say, there's a psychological adaptation syndrome that's always operating. And it's influenced by this self-actualization. I'm going to ensure my existence in the best way I can, given what's available at any particular point in time in my life. I hope you're staying with me with this, right? Because this is, we're going down. We're going into the unconscious now. So, the indirect forms of self-hate are based on illusions of oneself or others. If I imagine you to be just this incredible, great individual, and I fall in love with you thinking you're just perfect, that's my self-hate operating. Because eventually, what am I going to see? Oh, shit, she's not perfect. Oh, no. Now what? This whole operation was based on you being perfect. I had to have you a certain way for me to be okay. That's the setup, you see? I've just done it right there by having this illusion of you're perfect, or even if I go the other way, you're all terrible. It's also part of the self-hating process. See, whether I fall out of one side of the bed or the other, if I'm not staying aligned with reality, it's part of self-hate. If I have that same illusion towards me, I'm either got to be all good or I think of myself as all bad. It's self-hate. Now, what also happens, another indirect form, and I'll be saying more about that in a minute, is this attitude that it's all about me. You see, and that's the heart of when we take something personal, that what the person is doing is about me. And we now, conclude or interpret their behavior as a reflection of their feelings towards us. We make it all about us. Our controlling, our need to control people, places, and things is a manifestation of self-hate. It's based on the idea I can't deal with things the way they are. I have to control everything to be what I want it to be for me to be okay. Well, that's a total rejection of my ability to cope with life. So what happens is, let's go back to the illusions for a minute. These illusions we have, and I got this from Dr. Theodore Isaac Group, and he says, our illusions deflect energy and time from other activities and human possibilities, stunting our inner growth and impoverishing our actual self and the possibility for real happiness. Wow. Now, these illusions are based on self-deception. And the self-deception can involve myself, it can involve others, or it can involve life. That life is supposed to be a certain way. If I have an idea life is supposed to be a certain way, and I think life is supposed to be this way for me to be happy, I've just deceived myself. I am imposing my ideas, my beliefs on what life is supposed to be. And that's a self-deception. Life does not conform itself to my ideas and concepts of what it is. Life is what it is. I love Byron Katie's work. She says, when you fight reality, reality always wins. When you're in conflict with reality, reality is always going to win. And you see, this is at the heart of the problem. And one of the reasons why we don't develop better abilities to cope, because we're so busy imposing all of these expectations and ideas on how things are supposed to be, we never exercise dealing with what things are. That's why that sign and somebody wrote in the psychology, I had an experimental psychology class, and we had to go to the different departments at Cal State University. We had to write down what the graffiti was on the different walls in the bathrooms to see if there were any differences in terms of how people were, what graffiti was being put up in the various bathrooms. It was a brilliant, brilliant natural study. And in the psychology bathroom, somebody had wrote, reality is for people that can't handle drugs. I love that. Reality is for people who can't handle drugs. That's all of us, right? That's what we think, man. Can't handle reality. I'm going to try to turn it into what I think it's going to should be. And I'm going to try to make it into that because I think that's what I need to have happen for me to be okay. So we can now start to see is one of the ways we've harmed ourselves is by hating ourselves and really giving up on ourselves. Giving up on the possibility that we can learn to deal with the reality in our life, instead of demanding that our life conforms to our fantasies. So this stuff becomes very interesting because, you know, we can see, and we'll be talking about this more and more, you know, the conscious idea might be, well, let's say I go with the appeal of love as my solution. If I just get people to like me and love me, then I'm going to be fine. Right? So that's the direction that my life has taken. That's the trajectory I've taken to resolve this basic anxiety, right? That's the solution that I've discovered. Well, on the unconscious level, that is being driven, right, by my anxiety that I have to be liked by everyone. What did Bill call it in the letter? Top approval. When you read the letter, you'll see where it grabbed Bill. Everybody had to like him. And that meant that he had to be a certain way for people to like him. Most people that manifest this self say that they have to be a nice guy, right? They have to be easygoing. They have to be likable, which means not imposing any needs on the other person. But unconsciously, what's going on is that the person is trying to dominate the other person through their liking, through getting them to like them. So this is what I meant before. Unconsciously, we have these compromises going on. I want everybody to like me, but I'm going to dominate you and control you. Well, God, if you knew that about me, you wouldn't like me very much. So I can't let you see that. So I've got to keep these things away. I can't face those and own those. If you accuse me of trying to control you, oh my God, I'm going to be so upset and concerned. Oh God, please. No, I don't want to. I'm not going to impose any of my needs on you. And yet I am. That's what I mean about the unconscious compromise. And part of our work in looking at how self-hate has harmed us is we have to see who we are and who we're not. And we have to start owning all of who we are so that we can become who we can be. But as you're going to see, we have to do that by starting to develop the ability to support ourselves, which means to have compassion to our actual self as well as towards our real self. But that's for another time and another place and another discussion. I will stop my discussion of indirect forms of self-hate now and ask Roger and Thom to join me and to welcome them and their comments about tonight's subject.
Oh, I'm drowning in a sea of selves.
I knew you would. I knew you would.
Thom,
and which self said that, Thom?
Hang on. Hey, somebody get my unconscious. Hey, he's unconscious. It's like, well, wake him up. It's like, the despised God's here. The despised God likes to come. There he is. Oh my God.
All right. Well, we lost Thom.
And with that, I would like to say, Roger has a few words.
And with regard to your current situation of drowning, please swim strong, Thom. Swim strong. All right, get to the surface, babe.
I've got a little ducky around me. It's okay.
Because unless your wife or someone is nearby, no one is coming, Thom. All right, so swim like heck. Swim like heck for the surface, man.
Right. My wife being nearby right now is not going to be that much help. So
okay.
Yeah, I'll swim.
That's another story. Oh gosh, Al, that's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's a lot, but it's a lot of really good content. But it is deep, and there is a lot there. I want to get to the.
This might be why I've had a headache for 5 days with this shit going around in my head. I mean,
hopefully you'll feel much better now. Yeah.
I think it was quite cathartic. I think just what happened.
It's like you can wear yourself out with thoughts and deep thinking, Al. So anyway, I'm just going to make one comment, which is that the parts of reality I find most confusing invariably boil down to who I see in the mirror, right? When I look at myself in the morning. And the parts of myself that, in the terms we're talking about right now, are the most self-hating. Another way to think about that is self-rejecting, are the parts of reality that I find determine my life in a very fundamental way. Those aspects of myself that I feel like I can't handle, right? If I see them or feel them or acknowledge them, that I feel like are too scary for me to see or acknowledge. They control every important decision that I make, who I move toward, who I move away from, what circumstances I'm able to accept in my life, what circumstances I fight tooth and nail against, even though I know it's a losing cause. So as those of you who've heard me offer comments before know, the theme of self-acceptance it's just one aspect of reality acceptance, right? It's a subcategory of acceptance of reality. But I just keep going back over and over again to most of the time in my life and the lives of my friends and my clients, what I discover is actually I am substantially more capable of facing parts of myself that I want to flee from, facing parts of myself I want to deny. I'm actually considerably more able to do that than I believe myself to be. But the first step is just to be able to see it myself, right? And Alan said that several times tonight. He said it, so is Thom. I have to notice. How do I notice what's going on with me in terms of my patterns that Alan mentioned earlier? Reality keeps banging me over the head with it, right? Other people keep banging me over the head with it. All I got to do, which is the last thing I want to do, is listen. All I have to do is see, oh, that part of my life sucks. You know, that part of my functioning that isn't going well at all in my life. To me, life is my constant teacher. The parts of me that I'm struggling to accept, the trouble they cause myself and others, the trouble they cause in my aligning myself more with reality. Those are the parts I need to be aware of. Life is always trying to show me where to look.
Yes.
Life is always trying to show me where to look. Sometimes I look, sometimes I don't, but over time, I'm looking more rather than less, which to me is the most I can hope for, because I don't get black and white with any of these ideas, including real self. It's all works in progress. It's all three steps forward, 2 steps back from my point of view.
The interesting thing that I saw from Carl Rogers' definition of the fully functioning human being was, right, I love his one thought was that we become the sifter of our own experience.
Right.
Meaning that we don't allow other people's limited perceptions of who we are or what's going on define who we are or our reality. It's such a differentiated position when he talked about that. But what I love about what you just said, though, Roger, it really tied something in today. You see, this is where, when we've been saying all along in this meeting, is trouble doesn't mean something's wrong, what that's grounded in. Because trouble is just putting a spotlight on a moment that we can learn from. It can be revealing. That's the way you were talking about it just now, is that it's a moment of revelation that happens when we're having trouble, when we have the right relationship to that experience. Yeah. And see, that's where that self-hating thing comes from. If I make these judgments, then I'm going to be caught in my judgments and not in the revelation. Right? And you said that so clearly tonight. And I just want everybody to hear that, because what we're moving towards, another way to think of emotional sobriety, is a way of evolving ourselves. Just like you just said, it's a part of our evolution, part of our what it looks like to grow up. And we're just restoring that which was, impaired or interrupted.
And the only thing I would add to that, Al, is for me, when my life doesn't go as I want it to, as I think I need it to, for me to be okay, I will often get so lost in my emotional reactions to that, my anger or my disappointment or my depression or my anxiety or my loneliness. I mean, all of the above plus many, many more feelings, right? But I'll get so preoccupied, and there's nothing wrong with me having feelings in response to what happens in my life, right? But if I don't go further than that and go to the point of what is this trying to help me understand, right? What is this trying to help me learn? Then I've missed out on a large part of that opportunity.
I hear a lot of people criticize the 12 steps, that they're old-fashioned. I can understand that criticism. They were written back in 1935. Some people that are agnostic have difficulty with the word God used in the steps. For me, I look at the process that's involved. The forces that the 12 steps generate are so powerful that I think they're ageless. There's this interesting phenomena that happens when you work the steps. They create a charge and then a discharge. You know, the first step, we're powerless. Our life has become unmanageable. It creates this charge. You know, we're in big trouble and we don't know what to do. And then step 2 comes along and it says we have hope. That charge, that existential crisis that we have is resolved. What's happening here is parallel to life. We charge ourselves when we breathe in. When we exhale, we discharge. That's the rhythm of life. And the way I love to think about the 12 steps, it's helping us get connected to the rhythm of life so we can learn how to show up in a good way.